I'm going to be demonstrating the feature in Lightroom Classic and pointing out just a few of the differences between the other application. First of all, the new color grading panel appears as its own panel in Lightroom Classic and in Adobe Camera Raw, but in Lightroom and in Lightroom Mobile, it appears as a part of the color edit stack here under color grading. The color grading panel upgrades and replaces the split toning panel, but don't worry if you open a legacy file or if you're applying a legacy preset that contains split toning settings, like this one does right here. The shadow and highlight color tints that were set in the split toning panel are going to be automatically applied to these shadows and the highlights in the color grading panel. And if any changes were made to the balance slider, it's going to be updated as well to achieve a perfect match. All right, I'm going to use Command Z in order to undo the application of that preset. Now, the default view of the color grading panel displays three color wheels: the shadows, the midtones, and the highlights. Now, just a note, on mobile, there isn't a three-wheel color view. The device is just too small, and it would be too difficult to be able to accurately change the hue and saturation. So instead, they have the detail view, which we have here too, and we'll be talking about in just a few moments. Now, to quickly select the desired hue and saturation, we can just click and drag anywhere in a color wheel. If we want to limit the refinements to the hue, we can either drag the hue dot outside of the color wheel, or I can hold down the Command key on the Mac or the Control key on Windows and then click on this inside dot in order to rotate it. If I want to change the saturation, I just need to click on the inner dot. Photoshop adds this spoke, which is going to constrain my movement so that I'm only changing the saturation. Now, if I do drag far enough away from that spoke, then it will break that constraint, and then I can change the hue and saturation freely. In order to enable a finer adjustment, I can hold down the Option key on Mac or the Alt key on Windows, and then click on that inner dot, and it will move in a slower increment, and I can change both the hue and saturation. All right, I'm going to also add a color tint in my midtones. Let's just back off on the saturation there. But I don't want any color tinting in my highlights, so I'm going to leave that one alone. Now, below each one of these color wheels is a luminance slider. And while I can use that to darken or lighten the values, its real intent is to lift the shadows or decrease the highlights so that you can add color to your blacks or to your whites. We can see if I double click to reset it, because the background here is black, even though I have a strong color tint, it's not appearing in that area. And that's because black can't take on color. You have to make it a shade of gray, and you can do that with a luminosity slider. But in this case, I'm going to double click in order to reset it. I want my blacks to stay pure black without any color. One thing to note, while you can use the luminance slider to change the values in an image, there are more sophisticated controls in the basic panel. So for example, if I wanted to decrease or increase my highlights or my shadows, I'm probably better off using these sliders here. In the color grading panel, the luminance sliders are intended to make color grading specific changes, and they're actually optimized to work with the blending and the balance sliders. So let's take a look at those. We're going to use the balance slider in order to shift the range of values that define the shadows, midtones, and highlights. So if I move the balance slider to the left, we're going to see more shadows and we're going to see more of the blue tint. If I move it to the right, we're going to see more of the midtone and highlights. So I'm seeing more of the magenta tint that I added in the midtones. For now, I'm going to bring the balance down a little bit. And then the blending sliders, we're going to use those to determine the amount of color blending or the crossover between the tints that we assign. So if I move the blending slider to 0, my blues in the shadows and my magentas in the midtones should stay relatively pure. There'll be a little bit of crossover, but that's just to avoid any abrupt transitions. If I move the blending slider over to the right, then the blue and the magentas can actually combine and create new colors. It can be very handy for these creative adjustments, but also if you add color tints to shadows, midtones, and highlights, because without this blending slider, the midtones tend to get lost. If you want to keep your midtone color tints separate, you'll want to decrease the blending slider. If you want to temporarily boost the saturation to 100%, you can hold down the Option key on the Mac or the Alt key on Windows and drag the blending slider, and that might help you to preview where that crossover or that blending is taking place. On mobile, you can do the same thing by adding a second finger to the screen while you're using that blending slider. Now to toggle the visibility of a single color wheel, I can click and hold on the eye icon, or to toggle the visibility of all of the changes, I can click on the light switch on the color grading panel. If we move back to Lightroom, while I don't have individual previews for each color wheel, I can use the light switch to toggle on and off the color grading. All right, let's take a look at the detail view where we can see larger color wheels for our shadows, our midtones, and our highlights. Beneath each of these icons, we can see a little dot if there have been changes made to that color wheel. I can also select one of the color wheels by just clicking to the left or to the right in order to access them. You can use all of the same options for adding and adjusting your color tints as we could in the three-way color view. And if you click on the disclosure triangle, you also have access to a hue as well as a saturation slider. You can also click in the color swatch here and choose from the preset colors, or click on the eyedropper and then drag in your image area in order to select a color. I'll move that more towards blue and just back off on the saturation. There are two shortcuts that you can use in Detail View in Lightroom Classic and Adobe Camera Raw. Just hold down the Option key on the Mac or the Alt key on Windows, and then use the up and down arrow keys to either increase or decrease the saturation, or use the right arrow keys or the left arrow keys in order to change the hue. I'll go ahead and just move that right around to the magentas here. And let's take a look at the last icon for the global color slider. Now we can use this with or without making any changes to the other color wheels. If we just want to add a global tint, we can add it here. Or if I use Command Z to undo that, we can make changes to the hue or the saturation or the luminosity values down here, which will combine with any other adjustments we've made in the other color wheels. Now in order to reset just this color wheel, I can either double click in it, or I can right click and choose to reset global. I'll return to the three color wheel view. And again, if I right click in order to access the context sensitive menus, you can see that I can reset the color wheel that I clicked on, or all three of them, as well as all of the ranges. I can also double click the word adjust if I want to reset all the color wheels as well as the blending and balance sliders. If I ever wanted to copy a color wheel, I can right click and choose copy settings, and then right click again and paste those settings to another color wheel. Again, I'll use Command Z to undo that. And if I wanted to copy all three color wheels, I could choose the copy button, select color grading as well as the process version to copy it to the clipboard, and then move to another image in order to paste it. If I thought I wanted to use all of these settings again, I could create a preset by clicking on the plus icon, choosing Create Preset, selecting color grading and the process version, and then creating a preset. For now, I'll click Cancel. And then I'm going to move my luminance slider down just a little bit for my shadows to make those petals pop. And we can use the backslash key to show a before and after. So there you go, an overview of the new color grading technology in Lightroom Classic, Adobe Camera Raw, Lightroom, and Lightroom Mobile. I'm Julianne Kost. Thanks for watching.